I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Madison Elementary School District Board to order. Danielle, will you call the roll, please?
President Osborne, Vice President Holcomb,
Here.
Member Gresham,
Here.
Member Causey,
Here.
Member Spear.
Here.
We
Hey, you can now give him on, and you can pass the gavel back.
just for the record, I see that Dr. Osborne has arrived. We have a quorum.
It's like Miss Gresham was enjoying her 3 minutes of power.
It was for the vice president.
It wasn't a coup, they forced it on me.
Dr. Osborne, I told him to be patient and wait, but, you know. Anyone who knows
I will
me
be
knows.
eating my words. All right. So I'm just logging in. Okay, so roll call. Ms. Gresham, will you join me in presenting the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Please vote. The agenda has been adopted. All right, do I have a call for executive session? Being none? All right, I'm on to item 4.1, Superintendent's Report.
Thank
Dr.
you,
Baca,
Mr.
will you
President.
make this report?
Mr. President, members of the Governing Board and Executive Team, just as many of you know, we participated in our recognition ceremony earlier today. So congratulations to our students and our staff and the wonderful community for all that they were able to achieve. Later today in this board meeting, there's something that is on the forefront of all of our minds, which is what will be happening with the aggregate expenditure limit. And during the presentation, that will be part of our budget information item that we will be discussing with you that our Deputy Superintendent, Ms. Garvey, will be leading. Also at the forefront of everyone's mind is our mitigation plan specifically for face covering. I want to reassure everyone that we are not taking this lightly, but we are making informed decisions, and it's not a matter of if there will be a modification to that, it's a matter of when. We're very fortunate that it appears every indication that cases are going down, that we are doing much better in regards to what we've already accomplished, especially in keeping students in school with our mask test to stay program. I remind some folks that we were the first ones in Maricopa County, possibly the state, to conduct such or to have such a program that other districts are adopting. So our main goal is to make sure we keep students in school, transitioning over to hopefully what will soon be an endemic. And again, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and we'll make that announcement shortly as long as we continue to remain responsible and prudent in that decision making. Just a reminder also that not this coming Monday, but the following is President's Day, and we will not have school. And then finally, I must acknowledge and be humble about congratulating Dr. Osborne's team from that community college down south for their victory in basketball. And that concludes my report, Dr. Osborne.
Mr. Holcomb.
I just want to clarify, did you say community college down south? Just slip that one in.
He meant the best in the community, so.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that I had a chance this weekend to record part of a video for the Art Masterpiece program to advance that, and that is such an important program to our school district, and I hope we can not only continue but continue to grow that. And related to that too, I wanted to remind everybody or let them know that on the same night of our next board meeting, the U.S. Army Field Band and Chorus, or choir, chorus, will be performing at the Madison starting at 7, and it's a free concert. And I went last year, and it's phenomenal. So this is a great opportunity, particularly for your kids. Bring your kids to see that. It's a great opportunity. And yes, it was very, I enjoyed very much the awards presentation we had for the first semester in the Madison, and it's always great to see those. So thank you.
Ms. Gresham.
Thank you. I just want to thank the Madison advocates for all they're doing to keep our community informed. And just to reassure everyone that, I and I'm sure other board members are paying attention. I watch the education committee hearings for what's going down at the legislature. So, but I do want to thank the Madison advocates for all they're doing. And another reminder that we have another Thrive series on Thursday night online, and you can watch them all on the YouTube channel. I believe this Thursday is social media and gaming, so it will be quite an interesting one, I'm sure. So make sure you watch those. That's all I have. Thank you.
Ms. Kazi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank Madison #1 for that wonderful presentation. I have a dear friend whose son was a Madison #1 student and was really having a rough time in middle school, and academically it was kind of a disaster. And it was about the time that we created the magnet program there, and he started in dance, and it literally turned his life around. And he is now a dance student at University of Arizona, which has a very strong program. And I can't even underscore enough how much the programming that we do in our schools across the district, those extras that we call, those specials, are critical to so many students and keeping them engaged, but also giving them ideas about career paths or lifelong skills. And so thank you. It's just such a great reiteration of just the importance of this program. It was lovely to see one of our boys choir members who seems to be here more often than at rehearsal lately because he's in the upcoming play, so I will definitely be there. I also wanted just to state that I'm sure everybody in this room, is very concerned about the fact that we have this aggregate expenditure limit issue hanging over our heads, and so I just wanted to say tonight that raising the aggregate expenditure limit should not be a partisan issue. I feel very strongly about this, and I urge the legislature to simply vote to raise the EEL. We have so many important issues to deal with in our classrooms. Our energy needs to be focused there as opposed to other areas that could be simply taken care of by our legislature by a simple vote. Thank you.
Ms. Beard.
Thank you. I want to echo what my colleague, Ms. Kazi, stated about the aggregate expenditure limit. This is a simple fix. It shouldn't be that hard. And I urge our legislators to make the right decision and vote accordingly. I also wanted to say congratulations to our student athletes who we just recognized, as well as our nationally board certified teachers. That is an incredible honor. It is a very hard, rigorous process. And I want to congratulate our teachers in Madison that went through that process and accomplished that, as well as our Madison staff and our teachers who won grants and our teachers who have been recognized for their excellence in other ways. So congratulations to all of those individuals. And also thank you to Ms. Ball and all of the teachers and staff at Madison #1 and students for sharing their skill set and their expertise with us in the previous presentation. I did have an opportunity to substitute at Madison #1. I shared my experience with Ms. Ball. I'm hoping to have a chance to get back in front of the classroom. I got better as the day went on. I can't say I was really great the first period. So I'm going to apologize to the students in that very first period. I got better, but I would like to prove myself once more. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spear. We all look forward to the student reviews of your teaching excellence. Thank you, Dr. Baca, to pointing out the easy victory that the U of A Wildcats had over ASU. I was happy to, as board president, attend the game with mainly U of A fans and a scant number of, I think, probably paid ASU students. But it was a nice, relaxing game. We were up by 20 at one point. Speaking of sports, I apologize for missing the honoring the athletes. It's a great accomplishment, and to our teachers who've become board certified. One of my close coworkers, his wife got board certified, so I get to live her ordeal through him, and wow, that is one intensive process, and very thankful for all the teachers who invest that time and effort, and hopefully we can get more teachers to do that. All right, now on to calls to the public. I do have, and here's a question. I have Raquel Mamani. She wants to speak on the AEL item. I think what she wants, and if I'm getting this right, is probably speak during the budget advisory update. Okay, so we will hold for your comments when we get to that item. All right, do I have a motion on item 6.0, the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, I need to actually pull out the board meeting minutes because I inadvertently voted to not approve the Madison Park rebuild because clearly I was having problems with my keyboard. So I would like to correct the record on that if possible.
Okay, Dr. Baca, procedurally, I think, why don't we do this? Why don't we pull item 6.2 off of consent, and then we will vote on items, or can I get a motion on items 6.1, 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, and 6.6?
Mr. President, I move that we adopt the consent agenda items minus item 6.2.
Oh, that was the easier way to say that.
And I will second that motion.
All right, all those in favor, since it's a one-off motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay. And to Ms. Kazi, are you sure you want to vote aye? Just to,
Yes,
just to,
I've practiced over the last 2
Okay,
weeks, so
okay.
I'm ready.
all right. Do I have a motion to modify the board minutes to reflect that Ms. Kazi voted aye on the Madison Park construction contract?
Before you do that, Mr. President, may I ask for a point of clarification?
Yes.
Thank you. You're talking about action item 7.1 in the minutes?
Yes.
Ms. Causey, you're reflecting that you voted yes,
Yes.
and you're saying you actually voted no?
No, I was told.
Oh, no, she abstained in the.
Yes.
digital.
I accidentally.
Abstained.
Yes.
Okay, because 7.1 actually reflects that you voted yes, and in the minutes said your vote was recorded as staying in board docs, but you intended to vote A.
Oh,
And the
okay.
final resolution was that the motion carried, so it reflects 5A, 0 nay.
Okay, so why don't we just approve that item then?
We're good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the board meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
All right,
All those in favor?
all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes have it. All righty. Now, on to item 7.1, and I think what I will do is, why don't we have the staff presentation on the budget advisory, then we'll do public comment, and then we'll, and go from there if that works for everybody. All right. Darby, welcome. Or Dr. Baca, do you want to introduce this item?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the governing board and executive team. As you know, this is the time for budget, and so for the next several board meetings, there will be executive session to talk about the budget items, including what is being discussed with our IBN team. Tonight, Ms. Garvey will be presenting on an update regarding our budget advisory committee, but also we'll be presenting information that will affect our budget, including the thing that's on the forefront of our minds, which is the aggregate expenditure limit. We also want to welcome our MDCTA Association President, Ms. Anna Andrews. We've asked her to go ahead and as we start thinking about the budget and what we want to prioritize, I think it's important that we also hear from those in our schools and in our classrooms as to some of the challenges that they are experiencing. And so she'll be joining us in the discussion. Again, this is information item. No action will be taken. It just frames how we are going to move forward in our budget discussions, especially if the aggregate expenditure limit becomes an issue where we will have to make some deep considerations. And then finally, as part of the presentation, we do have to discuss some items that we will need to take action on shortly, as it will impact the budget, and that includes our Madison Virtual Academy and whether or not it will be sustainable through next year. So with that, I will turn it over to our Deputy Superintendent, Ms. Lori Gardner.
Dr. Baca, one quick question. This is also a time where we start, after the presentation, giving you some sense of some of the board members' thoughts or general direction, not for approval, but to get a sense of where we're thinking. Am I correct?
Well, sure. Dr. Osborne, members of the board and executive team, what this is also is a discussion item. So discussing what items that should be addressed where we find some commonalities and so forth. But you're correct, it's not an action item or something to prioritize. It's just us gleaning information and for Ms. Garvey to be able to take back to the budget advisory and for Dr. Lonely and Ms. Marshall to take back to IBN.
Great. Welcome, Ms. Garvey.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board, Dr. Baca and executive team. This slide needs no introduction, as it has been talked about a lot, is the AEL, the aggregate expenditure limit. I think before we can even talk about next year, this is on everybody's mind, and we need to talk about it and the potential impacts that it could have if something is not done to allow us to exceed the state spending limit. So the aggregate expenditure limit is comprised of all the school districts' budgets in the state of Arizona, and it's set by constitutional limit on how much it can increase every year, and that amount is based on inflation and student enrollment. This was set back in 1980, so this is it's a very old way to do it. And a lot has changed in school finance and funding since 1980, and that is why we are running up against some issues right now. So what is included in the aggregate expenditure limit does not include grants. And so when the Classroom Site Fund, which was Prop 301, was passed in 2001, obviously that was after 1980, but those funds were deemed at first to be within the constitutional limit. It did have to go back to the voters so that it was excluded, but that ran its course because in 2021, Prop 301 did expire. The legislature did extend that funding, though. However, now it's not voter protected. It's no longer a grant. It's within our formula. That accounts for over half of the 1.1 billion that we're over. So this is the first year that those funds were assumed into the budget. And then the enrollment had, last year through the pandemic, had also gone a lot lower. And so now we're based on that count from last year as well, driving us forward. So there are a few things that really did have quite a significant impact on it this year. When this happens, when the school district's cumulative budget exceeds that state spending limit, it requires the legislature to override it, allowing us to go past it. So that date for extending it or allowing us to override that limit is March 1st. So it is closely upon us. However, the legislature isn't doing a lot of talking about it right now just because there's a lot of talk about it, but they are waiting to, as we all know, Prop 208 for the income tax on high income earners is also tied into this, and they're waiting to see if the judge will rule on that so they know, because that too will impact what might or might not be in the expenditure limit. So we are waiting. The legislature is to act by March 1st to override this. And this, again, so that would be for this year that they would override it. So there really does need to be a long-term solution to this. Otherwise, every year, now that Prop 301 is in there, we will continue to keep bumping up against this limit, and every year wondering if an override will happen or not. So we don't know about the future yet. Nobody's talking about that. We're all focused on this year. As you know, we are quite a ways into our fiscal year, into our school year. 84% of our budget is in salaries and benefits. Madison's portion of that 1.1 billion is 6.6 million. That represents about 16.4%. That exceeds what we even have in our budget for salaries and benefits and maintenance and operations. If it is fixed for this year, that would be very nice, and the school year in a fiscal way would go on. If it is not, and there is not an override, Madison would be looking at a salary freeze, a spending freeze, possible reduction in salaries, and certainly if it wasn't passed, or if we didn't know what was going to happen going into the next year, there could be a possible reduction in force. There would again be spending freeze and a hiring freeze. There would be absolutely no salary increases for staff because it would take every penny that we have to make it through. If it is not passed this year, as I mentioned, we may have that spending freeze. We would have to look at what other funding sources do we have. Certainly any carry forward that we might take into next year would need to be used. We could relook at our ESSER funds that haven't been spent. They've been budgeted for and we applied for them in certain areas, but we would have to look at our ESSER funds also to help us through, keeping in mind that we would still, of course, abide by the 20% set aside in our ESSER for student achievement, the gap in learning loss. So, but it would have a significant impact on this district. I think it can't be stressed enough, not just ours, but statewide, if this was to happen. So that I just wanted to put out there because we're receiving a lot of questions, and certainly as budget advisory is going forward, this question has come up in our group too, and we have to talk about it. Next slide, please. But now that, so after that, we can talk about the fiscal year 23 governor's budget highlights. And again, this is the governor. This is not what you might be hearing from the legislature, bills that are coming up. So when the governor put out his budget, there were quite a few items, and the ones that impacted elementary districts and Madison are the base support level, which would be for every school district in Arizona. There is a law that says it is the lesser of 2% or inflation. Inflation last year through December was at 7%, so it would go to 2% for our budget, which is almost $89 more per student that we would get, and that amount is to maintain our purchasing power and to maintain our operations as we know it. Also in the governor's budget, Madison does receive results-based funding based on the achievement of our schools. We get approximately $690,000 for that, and the governor has it in his budget to make that become a permanent funding source within the formula. And so every year it would be looked at to see which schools were going to get that, and it would be added into the formula. So I just have us keep that in mind because at the moment, it is outside the formula. It is a grant that is awarded, and it was Governor Ducey's, it was one of his initiatives that got through, and just not knowing the longevity of it going forward with the governor's race coming forward, we keep that in mind. What would we do if those funds did go away? So, but he is proposing that it be included in our budget going forward. Next slide, please. So when I look at ADM for next year, because we always have to project where do we think ADM is going to be overall at this moment, and our numbers are not finalized, but we're looking at an overall decrease in ADM of approximately 30, which is a decrease of 133,000. The base support level increase for inflation is 600,000. When you net the two, that is an increase to our budget for next year of 467,000. Next slide, please. The other thing then that we have to do when we look at new revenues, we also have to look at our budget commitments. What do we anticipate next year might be or might not be? We look at teacher staffing every year. This number is not finalized. We're meeting with all of our principals, we're meeting with special ed to determine our staffing needs. We are comfortable at this point, though, saying that we probably do have a decrease in the number of teachers by 7, and that's merely based on you take second grade, roll them to third, and apply the student-teacher ratio and come up with the number of teachers that you need. If you remember, all during the pandemic, the last 2 years, we have not reduced any. We have not had a reduction in force. We have seen a reduction in the number of students, though, in enrollment in the past 2 years. So this is going back to staffing according to our ratios. So that would actually, it's in negative because it would be a return to the budget of $532,000. Our next item is medical insurance. We are out for an RFP, a request for proposals. It's our 5th year. We're finalizing our 5th year of our current one. We go out to see if we can procure a better rate, better plan, better combination of those things for our staff. So that has not been finalized yet. But in meeting with the consultants that are helping us, we are hopefully anticipating, we do not believe that our increase will be over 5%. I do want to say that even at 5%, that's pretty low. The districts around us are seeing double digits and even up to the 20. So we are very happy that it would come in at around the 5% or lower. But that would be a cost of $260,000. The next item that we know about is ASRS did release that the contribution rate for the district and the employees will actually be going down. It's a much lower decrease or much higher decrease than we've seen in the past. It will be going from 12.41 to 12.17, which overall saves the district $57,000. When you combine those three things, it is a net reduction to our budget of $329,000. So when you decrease expenditures and then the increase in revenue of $467,000, we're looking at a starting point next year of having an additional almost $800,000 higher budget next year. And keep in mind that's all, we are not discussing what happens if the aggregate expenditure limit, something doesn't happen. But that's the starting point for right now for next year. Again, Budget Advisory is keenly aware and continues to look at the non-permanent funding because as we make recommendations, these two items on this slide, the results-based funding and the safety grants, would not impact next year's budget, but it would impact the year after that. We do need to keep that in mind as we allocate money and what might we in future years, we always do a multi-year budgeting process, what might we need to assume back in the future? And the results-based funding, as you can see, is very heavy in positions that we really do believe are very critical to our instructional programs and our schools. So it's just keeping that in mind. We put it out there to remind people of what those positions are. And then the safety grants that were awarded through the state are 2-year grants, and so we still have another year on those, so we don't need to assume those this year. There is a legislature that has proposed a bill that would actually make that permanent funding, but until we don't know, we're just going to keep that in our minds. We try to keep it in as we look forward. Next slide, please. I do want to talk about ESSER funds just a little bit, and I put this here because there are a lot of questions out there about ESSER funds and how that plays into our budget, especially as we look at what other districts are getting and how they're expending it. So we had 3 phases or 3 rounds of ESSER, which are federal stimulus dollars that were distributed to the schools. ESSER 1, Madison did receive $496,000. You can see that went for the PPE, equipment, some materials, and then continuity of services. And then That money has been 100% spent, so that is not there anymore. ESSER 2, we received 2.1 million, and that money is very close to, it was to continuity of services, and that does help to pay for, just to keep us going for positions, for additional supports, as we knew in the past that community ed wasn't bringing in as much as they needed to. So it helped keep us afloat and keep all of our staff and our services and offer even some more things. So that's almost all gone. Now, ESSER 3, of course, here's the largest at 4.7 million. We've spent approximately, or projected to spend approximately, not including any summer programs we might have, about 1.7 million. So there is 3 million left in ESSER 3. And I think it's important to point out here, because we did have some employees or employee groups, and when we meet in our budget advisory, they bring what they hear. And so they hear that other districts are giving between 2,000 and 5,000 per employee, and why aren't we? And I just wanted to point out, so that everybody has that understanding, it was not distributed equally depending on the number of students. It was distributed on your Title I free and reduced percentage. And so comparable districts to us were receiving 40 million in that round, and we received 4.7, and so that's just for an understanding for people on where we are. And again, if the aggregate expenditure limit we'd have any roadblocks with this for this year, we would start looking at that 3 million to help us solve that problem too. And then I just put here the ESSER 3 budget. And it says projected as of 8/11, but that is the budget that we submitted to the state, are these items here. So it is the summer school, the employee retention stipend that we distributed when employees actually returned this school year. They received a $500 stipend for signing their contract and returning. And then we have a lot of the tutoring, the materials, and our remote learning program is in there as well. And with that, I'm just going to turn this next slide over to Dr. Baca.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Governing Board, if you were wondering what was going on the side, for whatever reason, inadvertently, Board Docs moved an agenda item. Your printed agenda item is correct. It has to do with the math adoption, which is the next information item, so you'll need to refresh Board Docs sometime between now and then, okay? So regarding the Madison Virtual Academy and its viability, we asked families in the Madison Virtual Academy whether or not they intended to remain there. Ms. Garvey, not off the top of my head, how many do we have currently enrolled? About 146, is that correct?
Yes.
About 146 students. So of those, 30 indicated they would return next year. Now that was spread across grades 1 through 8. So when you look at having 9 teachers with only 30 committing to next year, that leaves a pupil-teacher ratio of 1 to 3, which is not viable in terms of a budgetary standpoint. We know it meets the needs of those families that have appreciated virtual learning, not just because of the pandemic, but for other reasons, such as travel and the fact that it better meets the needs of their student. So we have to really base it on how viable can this be. So knowing that, we will want to make a decision by the next governing board meeting, and it would be brought to you for action as to whether or not we continue through next year or whether we suspend it for next year, understanding that we just do not have the student population at this point in time to make it a viable program. And so that will impact our staffing, but those teachers that are part of the Madison Virtual Academy, obviously we will need them in our brick and mortar schools. We would want to continue retaining them. We know that there's going to be more vacancies than the 7 attrition that will take place as a result of decreased in enrollment over the last 2 years. And so it's just something that, we want to consider for a viable option in the future, but regarding the budgetary constraints of the coming year, I'm just not sure we would be able to be fiscally responsible in recommending that it continue. So I just wanted to give you that piece of information of how it would impact the budget and what we would need to do to not close it but suspend it if it becomes viable in the next coming years after next year, then we're not having to reapply for it and so forth. We can just go ahead and start it up again.
Yes, Ms. Spear.
Could you please repeat how many students we have that are committed to come back to MVA? I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear that.
30.
30.
30.
Thank you. 30. Thank you.
And we have 9 teachers, so that's about 3.3 students per teacher.
Thank you.
And Ms. Garvey, you have more for us?
I have more, yes. So Budget Advisory has been exploring some areas. I wanted to bring them up. These are our first round of conversations. We are definitely awaiting input from from the governing board. But the first area is decompression, and this is phase 2, so we all expected this to show up, and so that's why it's first. But just to, we looked at this. Minimum wage increases every January 1st, as is required by law, and it increases by the percentage of inflation through August. So through August, it was 5.3%, which raised minimum wage from $12.15 to $12.80. When you look at, I put a snapshot of our this current year, classified hourly salary schedule up there. Grades 6 through grades 10 were affected because they all now have a starting minimum wage of $12.80. So you can see it even crept up. I think we probably thought maybe level 9 would go up, but now it affected 10 as well. And that just continues, and it continues to compress that salary schedule. And so we are definitely, we're aware of it, and we're going to be talking about it to see if there's anything or what our next step is, in our next phase, what we would recommend. But that's our first area of exploration. Next slide, please. In the other areas to explore, we talked about student achievement being the very first thing that came up, and just how critical it is to fund those, to continue the funding for the SIAP plans, which are the School Improvement Action Plans, to really look at and have those plans so that they can address the needs of our students for next year. There was brought up, and this is a brainstorm of the group, perhaps interventionists at lower grades, because they were saying, as we all know, second graders, this might be their first year actually in school. And so it would help perhaps if we had the interventionists at the lower grades to help out, especially with Move On when reading. And then, and that K4, I'm sorry, should have been up there with interventionists at lower grades. Providing dean of students at each school to help with behaviors was something thrown out. I know that we have been talking about behaviors a lot lately in our school reports, and so that was brought up, that is there something that we can do to help with behaviors to actually have an impact on student achievement. The next topic that came up was retaining and attracting staff, and of course everybody is feeling the inflation and the cost of living, and so salary increases were brought up. Retention stipends were brought up. People expressed how they really felt valued and appreciated last year with the retention stipend. That was the one paid out of ESSER. That was $500. They said they even appreciated it, I shouldn't say more, but along with the salary increase last year, because they said when you have a 1.5% salary increase, you don't see it when it's like spread out all year. But when you get a $500 less year, taxes and everything, you still get a check in your hand, so to speak. I guess we don't have checks anymore, but you have more, you actually see it and you feel it, and in that, they feel that it was really good for their morale, and it really made them feel appreciated. So they stressed that. Again, salary schedules, it's all in there with that compression, it's in there with everything else, like there are vacancies, lots of vacancies, and they're saying, is it because of the compression and the low salary? So to be looked at. Another topic that was brought up was perhaps there could be some sort of mentoring program for new and emergency certified teachers and new classified staff. And again, around that, if you were a new teacher 2 years ago with those current second graders, you may never, you know, it's different to come to school now and teach. And how do you get, there's just so much, and they just felt that new teachers would benefit if there was some kind of mentoring program, formal mentoring program for teachers. And then it came to training. There was a conversation. People are, and I think this conversation came up with because people are helping out wherever they can all over the place. And they just said it would be so nice when you're popping in somewhere if you would have a little bit of training or helping out in this situation. So I think the staff has asked in the past for cross-training, more training, but it really seemed to amp up a little bit this year because people are helping out wherever they can. And then the question just came up, and it was more a question. It was not a thing, anything that's gone further in our conversation, but out of that came, does it make sense then to make all Wednesdays TCT days? And that was just a question that was put out there, and so we included it. And then the noon duty aides and the classroom paraprofessionals came up as well. And then again, I made that note that those are the two things that we need to keep in mind when we are looking at these areas that we're exploring. But this is where we are right now, and we, again, look forward to input from the board. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna Andrews, who is going to talk about from a teacher's perspective.
All right, thank you, Mr. President, members of the board, Dr. Baca, and executive team. This has not been an easy year for anybody in this room, anybody across the state. I mean, it's everybody struggling, kids, parents. But it seems from my position as the Association of the District's Teachers Association, overusing association, but also people that aren't members of the association, peers, different people who've been reaching out, looking for help and assistance. There's some big commonalities that are coming up this year that have just made it a little bit more difficult for us inside the classroom, and especially impacting our ability to be able to reach out to students the way that we were hoping we would be able to reach out to students this year. But again, we're finding all sorts of barriers that are kind of stepping in the way for that. The first one, and I feel like you've probably heard this a million times, but we're going to still keep screaming it at the top of our lungs, oh my gosh, we need substitutes. It has been incredible seeing how this district has stepped up with board members, with district administration, with coaches, with campus administration, everybody stepping in to help fill that time that we are losing. I cannot tell you how incredibly grateful we are, but we're also starting to see how that's impacting other areas, which I will get to in a minute. As you know, when teachers lose their prep, whatever work they were planning on doing within that 45 minutes to an hour now has to be taken home. And one of the things that we have emphasized so much over the last couple of years is the social and emotional well-being of teachers and staff. We're not finding time for that. We're having to inch in all of this additional work that we've lost from having to cover classes, from having to split classes. In some cases, if it's a lack of substitute situation because a teacher is gone for a long period of time from illness, or the teacher has resigned partially through the school year, which has happened a few times this year, we're not only losing our prep and splitting classes, we're having to create lesson plans for those classes as well. And creating lesson plans for those classes is now taking away time from lesson planning for our own classes. The time that we are having to spend outside of school to do lesson planning and to grade and to assess where our students are at is exponentially higher than it ever has been before. And it feels like it's just kind of compounding more and more and more as the years have gone on. That also leads into this need for planning for the needs of all students. One of the most important things for us as teachers is to try to reach as many students in the classroom as we can, and we have the most incredible diversity of students. We have students who struggle with the basics. We have students who are ready to teach the class. They're so advanced. And it's always been a tricky game trying to figure out how to be able to balance the needs of all of those kids within one class period. There is no magic recipe lesson plan. There is no magic recipe strategy to be able to reach all those students. But we've found ways, whether it's engaging in small groups, one-on-one, being able to do all those things. But then again, going back to the issue of losing time, we can't prep the lessons the way that we need to, especially with these huge disparities that came from inconsistent learning last year. And a lot of emotional and behavioral needs of students this year that are standing in the way of them being able to catch on to the basics because they've become so hyper aware of things that maybe weren't as much of a barrier for them to be able to cross in the past, but it's much more difficult for them to be able to settle with and be able to learn when they're in a classroom now. The amount of time that we are putting into trying to fill those gaps adds into that exponential amount of time that we are using planning. But it's also really hard when we're seeing these students struggling in class, knowing that if we had some additional resources, it might take the load off of our shoulders. This is the problem with additional resources. We don't sometimes know what it is that we need. And our district is incredible. Dr. Winters, the coaches, anytime we reach out to them and say, this is a resource that we need in the classroom, they're on top of it. They're looking it up. They're doing the research. They're finding out if it's something that we actually are able to adapt into our classrooms. But the amount of time needed to do the research into those resources that we need right now is, again, digging into this amount of time outside of school, spending hours looking at different things that are out there. I am optimistic that this year, I'm hoping that within this year and next year, you're going to start to see some of the brilliant ideas from teachers who've been dealing with the struggle across the nation coming out more. We've tried these practices. We've had a year to practice them out. They're working. But again, that's going to require some more time for us to be able to look into those strategies. Behavior management is causing us to get lots of gray hair and wrinkles. Our students are struggling, very, very much struggling. Some of the conversations that they have with each other are hurtful. I mean, it'll stop us in our tracks hearing some of the things that they are saying to each other. And you can see that it almost, in some senses, they're responding emotionally to the fact that they just said that. There's such a lack of a filter. And I don't know if that's because so much of last year was spent more in social media and just kind of word vomiting that stuff out, as opposed to being in a classroom where you do practice those self-management skills and you filter out what it is that you're going to say. But there's so much impulsive and disruptive behavior that it's exhausting every class period. I've been hearing from substitutes that their heart's in it, they want to help the schools, but they spend so much of a class period dealing with that behavior management that they can't come back. They're emotionally and physically spent, that they need to take some time off to rebuild themselves before they could come back into a classroom. And this is even with teachers who have very explicit, detailed discipline management in their own classrooms. There seems to be that, like, they need to see the teacher. They need that consistency. When a substitute comes in, it just disrupts everything that has already been disrupted for them over the past couple of years. And also, that ties into that learning of all students. Our students who are struggling with the basics are oftentimes the ones who are the most disruptive, because it's hard for them to settle themselves down and to focus in on that learning. And they're embarrassed to ask questions because there's a lot of stigma and a lot of negativity. There's a classroom culture that has to not only be brought back, but it has to be changed. It has to be revamped. So much compassion, so much learning, and we're trying to model that, but again, we're seeing a lot of difficulties with that. The aggregate expenditure limit is, I don't know how else to say this, but it's insulting that we have to deal with this. Everything that the teachers and the staff and administration have been doing over the past couple of years, I know that a lot of parents have been struggling, saying, well, I didn't see a lot of work when we were online. We busted our humps. We really did. We took something brand new that we've never done before, and we worked hard. And for us to, over the last couple of years, to put all of that energy, that time away from our children, our own children, that, risking our own emotional and mental health, to see it met with this type of resistance is insulting, and it hurts. And I don't think that people really understand how much teachers internalize that, how important the support is from our legislators, how important the support is from our community. Luckily in Madison, we have an incredible community that supports us. But the fear that this is not going to be overridden, and the fear that we're going to have to look at losing positions, people who want to be here, people who are toughing it out, it's devastating. And so that is something, especially right now, especially as March 1st is looming closer, it weighs extremely heavily on our shoulders. And it's something that we're dealing with on top of the idea that what if we do have to get salary cuts? 2% is not going to cut any sort of inflation increase, especially over this past year. Going to the grocery store is not the same. Filling the gas tank is not the same, especially when you have a lot of teachers who live way outside the district that make the drive to come to Madison because they love their job here. Dealing with the fear of losing an affordable living, having to make your peace with the fact that salaries could be cut because of the AEL is also something that weighs very heavily on teachers right now. And it all comes down to this last bullet point, burnout. I have very uncomfortable conversations with teachers on a weekly basis, crying, telling me that this was their job. This is what they were put on earth to do. This is what they've wanted to do since they were 5, 6 years old. And they're saying that they can't do it anymore. They can't bear it. They can't weigh this anymore. Many of them saying, I don't think I can get through the rest of this school year. And then there comes me begging them, please, 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 at least last it out. We're kind of getting over the worst of this hump from Omicron, see if things get better. But they're so burnt that there's nothing left in them to be relit. All of this contributes significantly to that. So aside from the depressing part of that, please, Ms. Sung. We're not quitting. One of the things that I would like everybody to understand is that there are some people across the state, some educators, who are taking kind of a depressed, angry approach to dealing with everything that's going on. In Madison, your teachers don't feel that way. We're angry and it's depressing, but we're motivated and we want to fight. And we want to start getting to the root of this issue, which is coming up with solutions. We need to be finding creative, risk-taking ideas and solutions, but almost as important as coming up with those solutions, everybody in the district, kids, parents, teachers, staff, everybody has to understand that we're going to have to be really open-minded, not just for the remainder of this year and next year, but probably for a couple of years. We're going to be trying things that we've never done before because we're doing things we've never done before. That ties into asking everyone to have patience with us. I know there's a lot of frustration right now with why is my kid not achieving at this level? Why is the teacher focusing so much on this topic when there's all these topics that need to be taught? I just ask that everybody continues to have patience and trust in your professionals that are in the classroom and know that we are doing the best that we can. That patience, that grace, even just a simple acknowledgement of like, hey, my kid couldn't stop talking about World War I tonight when he came home. That is amazing. And it shows us that you guys continue to support us, which is really important. I think the biggest thing that I really want to push for, and I love that Ms. Garvey included this with the Budget Advisory Committee conversations, when we look at next year, we've got to put in time for teachers. One of the things that really kind of burnt us this year is we thought it was going to be easier than last year. And we thought that there was some things that we were going to be able to do quickly and efficiently because we're teachers. But when it came time for us to look at these big disparities in student learning, we realized we don't have nearly as much PLC time as we need. If we're going to be looking into new resources, if we're going to be practicing new creative risk-taking ideas and solutions, we have to have time together next year to be able to hash it out. A lot of our TCT this year has been spent on PD, and what isn't spent on PD has been given back to teachers to use for PLC and to be able to kind of lighten some of the load, which is great. But I'm a huge fan of this idea of using as many Wednesdays as possible next year for us to really focus in that PLC. I think we're going to see the biggest bang for our buck when you give teachers time to go through the data, to make plans together, to help each other grow, and to be able to share ideas and try those ideas out. Time is probably the biggest thing that can be done to help teachers right now. Of course, coaching for behavioral strategies is something we need to continue. Our coaches this year have been covering classrooms, bless their hearts, but we miss them. And we need them. We need them to help us with these behavioral issues that we're dealing with. We need them to help with the new teachers that are struggling. We need those coaches back. And the last thing that I would mention is that teacher collaboration in decision making. we have all of these committees, we have all of these open opportunities for teachers to get involved, and I don't know if that's always communicated out well. And that's something that I look forward to continuing to work with Dr. Guerin and our district administration going into the future, how we can integrate teachers a little bit more in collaborating in decision-making. In the words of Forrest Gump, that's all I have to say about that.
So here's what I'm thinking. We'll take our public comment. If you can get by a microphone, and what I'd like to do is make this more a round robin and, or sit next to Dr. Baca, however you, or we're social distancing, but, you know, whatever we need to have a kind of a round robin discussion between Ms. Garvey, Dr. Baca, and you.
Sure.
And Dr. Lomeli and whoever.
Yeah, Dr. Osborne, we have an extra seat over here for Ms. Andrews so that we can do that. But before we do it, I just want to conclude this discussion and or our presentation to just say this. It's going to take a collective effort. It's going to have give and take. It's going to, as Ms. Andrews pointed out, be creative. We need to be determined, and we need to be flexible. We have a tremendous community, and we're fortunate to have tremendous teachers and tremendous staff at the schools and at the district and throughout Madison to be able to address these issues. And if we can collectively come together to be able to say, this is the situation that we're in, regardless of what is to blame or who is to blame, let us instead work on solutions. And so with that, I look forward to the discussion that comes as a result of this presentation.
Okay, before we do our discussion, Ms. Mamani, would you want to come up, and you have 3 minutes.
3 minutes, oh. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board, Dr. Baca, and executive team. My name is Raquel Mamani, and I'm a substitute teacher. I'm one of those unicorns out there that has been doing this since before the pandemic, because I already saw the need for this. And not only am I a former special education teacher, a substitute teacher, but I'm a public school advocate. So I've been advocating for our public schools prior to the pandemic. And I'm here today because of the AEL. And, you know, listening to Ms. Andrews, it just brings it home. I was at the legislature today in the Education Committee, Senate Committee, and I do not hear them speaking about the AEL. And I'm speaking to the choir as far as what's going to happen. I know you all know, and I appreciate your statements of support and urging the legislature to act before March 1st, because on top of everything else that our teachers, our students, our families, our school boards, our administrators have to deal with, now they have to worry about what's happening on March 1st. And I'm losing sleep about it too. And all of these things that Ms. Andrew brought up are all involved with all of this. So I'm here today to really ask the board and the Madison advocates and all of us that you know, work for our communities to collaborate. I work with an organization called Save Our Schools Arizona. We are non-partisan, and we have the information. And so we're angry, we're determined, but we have got to get the information out to our communities. And so I am putting our services out there, and we are willing to collaborate with the advocates. I know I have a call into Ms. Garvey. We're going to chat. But Madison School District has always taken the lead, and so it's time for you all, us, to lead other districts, to inform our communities so that they can raise their voices to the legislature, so that we can roar. You know, they are having trouble hearing us, and I really just wanted to come here today to say that as far as Madison #1, all across to our district and other districts, that we work together and collaborate on a way to inform our communities. And so I put myself and on our organization at your disposal, and hope that we can collaborate on a quick way to inform our communities about what's happening with the AEL. Thank you.
All right, why don't we jump into kind of a roundtable discussion, and I think, you know, I think it's just going to be a little bit free form, and, you know, kind of if folks can talk about things that resonated with them in terms of issues and priorities, and then ask questions and things of that nature. I don't think I'm going to break it down by you go first, you go second, so just chime in, and if someone wants to start, that'd be great. Ms.
I do have a question and a few comments. I have a question for Ms. Garvey. On the last slide you presented, where you talked about the Dean of Students, and then you mentioned the K through 4. So is the K through 4 for the interventionists, or is that for the Dean of Students also?
Mr. President, members of the board, Dr. Bach and executive team, Ms. Gresham, yes, that's actually for the at lower grades. I'm very sorry about that. That providing should have been its own bullet.
Okay, good, because I did have a concern, because I was thinking all our schools need a Dean of Students, especially our middle schools. As I witnessed when I was subbing, our teachers are stretched so thin, as Ms. Andrews mentioned. The prep hour is huge just to regroup and use the restroom. Like, the teachers need this time, and a Dean of Students would help tremendously with that and with the behaviors. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Should I keep going, or do you want to?
Yeah, go as
questions?
far, and then we'll jump around for a little bit and then see how it goes, and I'll try to moderate to the extent possible.
And also, of course, thank you to Ms. Garvey for all your work on this. It's excellent job, as always, under extraordinary circumstances. And thank you to Ms. Andrews for all your thoughts on that. And yeah, I just think it's atrocious what's going on at the Capitol, and that we're having to worry about this. You know, Arizona's always at the bottom of funding. They're voting on privatizing, more education instead of dealing with this cliff. So I am in touch with our representatives and senators that are in our Madison footprint. I talk to them regularly. So yeah, please speak out about all this. And of course, we have a great community, and our board and our administration. Hopefully, we will continue to give the grace to our teachers and our students who are, still recovering and coming out of this pandemic. So I think that's all I had for now. Thank you.
Mr. Holcomb, you look like you're anxious to speak.
Yeah, if I can't, listening to this and looking at the presentation, it seems to me two things really stand out as focus on a broad scale, and that is time and support. I mean, we have been advancing things. We have signature programs that are really phenomenal. But unfortunately, in many ways, they're pretty mature in a number of ways. And in my mind, what we need to do now, both from a budget resource and just focus, is doing those two things, because I think that brings everything, other things together. There was a lot of discussion about culture. We've been very, we are very proud of the Madison culture. It sounds like that is one of the things that's helped us get as far as we have now. And we're always going to have the looking stipends and that too, but it seems to me our focus in being inventive is to not try to go out and do a lot of different things, but really focus and get that core down. And it's on everything. What I've looked at here is getting supports, because we need to support staff. We need to look at that decompression issue. We need to really try to see what we can shore up our human capital. And that, by doing that, getting our support staff and doing everything we can to get teachers more time and the support they need, and that goes through it. And I think, in my mind, at least, we start with that as either a twofold or singular focus from what we have, because we have limited resources, and I think we have limited time to really implement that. That's my thought.
Ms. Kazi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wow, I don't remember a budget hearing that was so powerful. Is it just me? I mean, I just was like, rocked my world. I just have to say the words that came to mind in listening to our presenters is that it is extraordinarily humbling to be sitting here when, it's so clear that the people that work for this organization are committed at levels that are hard to comprehend. And that's truly what I heard tonight. And so I think it's important to honor that because they know their work, they know their challenges, and that's what we heard. And so what areas that would be areas that I would be interested in supporting would support budgeting decisions that would support time for planning, collaboration, assessing. The discussion about TCT Wednesdays, expanding them, I think would be important. Coaching, looking at behavioralists. I don't know how hard it is to find them today, but I know we have used them in the past, and they are trained to really help with dealing with behavioral issues. Obviously, this decompression issue has been of high concern to me for a while now, and to see that a full third of the grades are now going to be impacted is astounding, and obviously is going to need to be addressed. I mean, we have a lot of issues with the limited funds for this coming fiscal year, so I think the need to be creative is going to be huge and collaborative. So obviously, there's a lot of other conversations that we'll have on that, but that this is what rises to the top for me as I think about the conversations we've had here tonight.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Ms. Garvey and all of your staff and Ms. Andrews and all of our administrators for presenting all of what we have to consider. The one thing that I do find heartening is that Ms. Andrews' presentation is a mirror image of what Ms. Garvey was presenting to us. You were able to clarify, Ms. Andrews, for us exactly what that looks like in real terms, and sharing with us the teacher experience in real terms. And so I am very interested in supporting the first two bullet points and all of what that encompasses. I think that there is no clearer need than what is listed under your areas to explore, the first two bullet points: student achievement and retaining and attracting staff. Those are, I think, I can't speak for my colleagues, but I know that we share a concern with regards to those two items in general. As for the aggregate spending limit, or AEL, I think, Ms. Andrews, one of the things to consider is that we are a member of the audience of political theater. And it is so unfortunate that teachers feel devalued by that conversation. It is not okay, but it is not new. And I do believe that being an election year, legislators don't want students online. I did ask, this leads to a question for Ms. Garvey. I did speak with a Republican, a member of the legislature, and one of the comments that was made to me with regards to when I expressed my concern was, schools have plenty of money in ESSER 3. They have plenty of money in ESSER funds. There won't be any hurt. Could you clarify for the members of our community a little bit about what that school of thought is? Because when I was listening to your presentation, I understood that ESSER 2 and 3 are already allocated for, if not spent, over the last 2 years, while we have endeavored to create the wheel while rolling it. Could you please explain to me what that means exactly with regards to ESSER 3?
Sure. Mr. President, members of the board, Ms. Spear, our ESSER 3 funds.
And Ms. Garvey, I'm sorry, I'm actually partially deaf in this ear. Could you speak up?
Sure.
I think it's so important for all of our members of our community that might be watching to understand exactly, because I have a feeling that this is one of the talking points that we're going to be hearing. And I would like to understand from your perspective what that all means.
Sure. So our ESSER 3 funds, and as I stated earlier, Madison received approximately $4.7 million. So there is a requirement with those ESSER funds that 20% be set aside to address the learning loss that there occurred. So that is approximately, for my easy math, $1 million, which leaves us with $3.7 million. We've already spent some of that on continuity of services, other things, which leaves us with $3 million. As you can see, $3 million does not cover a $6.6 million deficit. ESSER 3 is not continuing money. ESSER 3 is one time to keep us afloat, to keep us going, to help address some of the challenges that have arisen because of the whole pandemic. So when you look at that and you look at an aggregate expenditure limit that will be exceeded every year, or could be, this is not a solution. ESSER funds are not the solution to the aggregate expenditure limit issue. And so just our numbers alone would show that that does not equate.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I think it's important so that we can make sure that we're all understanding exactly what the suggestion might have been. I encourage and support the proposal to address let me go back to that one bullet. As I said, just in sum, the student achievement and retaining and attracting staff, and all of the suggestions and ideas within that. I support that very much. Thank you.
So a couple thoughts, probably a little more than a couple, but going back to the ESTHER funds, it looks like we had allocated about 1.2 over the 3 years for the virtual academy. I think it seems pretty clear that we're not going to move forward with the virtual academy. And so one thought I had is, let's look at the next 2 years as a remediation stability push. And not all these resources we should treat as ongoing, but as a kind of a push, whether it's supports, whether it's, all those things, and see what we can do in a targeted effort to give teachers supports, and balance that out. I'm a little nervous about the idea of TCT every Wednesday, because I'm trying to balance classroom time with support time, but I'm sensitive to that. It seems to me that the one thing that we really need to do is relook at our sub-model and move to a more permanent subs that can provide more systematic supports. And I know what I don't know, but it seems to me that if we have subs who know the kids better, that can provide support, we're prepared in case we get the pi or whatever the zeta or whatever the next variant is. But we have that capacity, and then use that capacity in a coordinated way to support teachers and then provide that individualized support. But I think the only way you can do that is have those people there. And then the goal would be to have metrics around how many times that teachers had to fill in classrooms, and really let's drive down to an operational system where that minimizes. And I get that uncertainty seems to me to be one of the biggest areas. And with MSD teaching, I'm sure there's plenty of remediation. Just kidding, but I mean, systematically, this is a horrible, unstable system. And so I think we just need to kind of look at those ESTHER funds as a 2-year push, and not be afraid that, say, in 2 years, yeah, we may lose some of these resources, but hopefully we'll be over the hump. The one thing I think we should look at as you're going up to RFP in the state health plan is more options for employee assistance programs, free, and really push those and see if we can get those wrapped up. I think the good news is we're going out to bid, and all the health plans will lower their price and take a haircut in the first year. They'll make it up in the next year, but at least that gives us some benefit. I think in terms of looking at decompression, I think we should go look at those lower salary positions, and let's have an honest assessment. Are we really market rate? Because if we're churning that many people, our salaries are fundamental. I don't care if it's compressed, decompressed, but let's get that stability down, because that is driving I think, some of our issues. MAC, I think we should also take a fundamental look at the cost of MAC, and I think we need to increase it, and we need to dramatically increase the salaries to get that revenue stream back up. And I don't mean in a manner, that drives some fiscal, but having a program where we can't serve the needs of the community, and maybe include with that some type of discount for lower income families. But I think we have to get real that, kicking around the bottom and turning over, it's starting to fiscally negatively impact our district, and I think we need to jump on that. The summer intervention, I know we have money budgeted. I think that would be a good opportunity to also create some social, emotional, behavioral, intense, identify those kids who not only do they get instruction, but we have some time for them to work on those issues and really hyper-focus our counselors, our social workers, really deep dive to the extent. And then on the salary side, I like probably out of all the items, the retention bonuses are probably my favorite tool for now while we're in uncertain times, and to the extent that we can continue that would be great. And I know Ms. Garvey will be able to figure out how to pay for all these asks. I sound like a Bernie Sanders Democrat while doing all this, but no, I think in a focused, targeted way, we're recovering the organization. I think I heard that from Scott, and I think we all feel the challenges that our whole staff is going through, and we want stability. To me, is the most important thing. So, Dr. Baca.
Thank you, Dr. Osborne, members of the Governing Board and Executive Team. I think the word I kind of want to use right now is flexibility. And what I mean by that is the following. It's my responsibility to ensure that for next year, you're in a position, and Dr. Guerin's in a position, to be flexible enough to move this district forward. I think I agree with Ms. Andrews' assessment that we're almost there. Let's just hang in there, right? We need to be flexible with the uncertainty of the aggregate expenditure limit, because the issue may not be for this year, but it is for next year if there's not a resolution to that. Committing ourselves with the ESTHER funds that may be needed to get us through until something is done with the aggregate expenditure limit may be necessary. So I think as we approach the budget, we need to be as flexible as we can to put ourselves in a position to pivot in one direction or the other. Next, I want to say thank you for bringing up the retention stipends, because one thought and one idea that we discussed in the executive team is that for the employees who turn in and sign their contracts or work agreements at the time that they're due, rather than next year, this year we can give them that retention stipend for honoring their contract and commitment to work in Madison. So we do want to make that our priority. I think that's going to be very, very important. When we talk about PLC or TCT Wednesdays, I want to use the term flexible for everyone. As Ms. Andrews and I have discussions, we need to make sure we're flexible enough that as we become creative with what is needed and the resources that are needed, it's going to be important that at some time there may be the need for professional learning. Because if through the TCT Wednesdays, our teachers come up with a creative approach toward, for instance, behavior management, there may be a need for professional learning to take place in order to address that issue. So I just want to make sure that, as we start our discussions, there are long lists of what we want to do, but I just hope that we can be very flexible in our approach so that we can easily pivot one direction or another, placing an emphasis on recovering from this pandemic for students, for staff, and for our community. And it is going to be a collective effort. Finally, I just want to be able to say that I do want to communicate before the end of this week to our community about the aggregate expenditure limit. Fortunately, we do have, but also unfortunately, so it's a little bit of both, we have the representatives and senator that represents our Madison community that want to do something with the aggregate expenditure limit. It's how do we reach the majority or the 2/3 majority that will be needed to be able to do something, even if it's just short term, so that it's taken care of until a long-term fix is needed. We just need to make sure that that issue is addressed. It is critical. And to think that someone may have the mindset that ESTHER Funds can make up for it beyond it. No, ESTHER Funds is actually what has contributed to this dilemma and this problem. And once it goes away, it's not that we're going to be receiving those funds again. So that's why action will be needed in order for us to do that. But I do want to be able to communicate before the end of this week to our staff, our employees, and to our community about this issue and how it could impact Madison, not just this year, but next year as well.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Baca, your planning strategy was, I assume we have a aggregate expenditure limit and a non-addressed budget, and the good news is that I think the timing we'll know after March if we're, really in the issue. I'm more optimistic that this will be resolved. I think there are some adults in the room, and there's going to be a lot of flailing about in the next couple of weeks, and they'll probably do a short-term bridge, and then by the end of the year, once the judge rules, they'll build a more permanent bridge, and we just need to be patient with the process. And I know it's stressful, but, as president of the board, I'm not stressed about it. I'm concerned, but not stressed. So I just want to pass along as someone who works down there quite a bit and has gone through these kinds of things before. Other thoughts on budget priorities or issues or other thoughts from the board? Dr. Baca and administration, you get some sense of where we want to go?
Mr. President, I would like to ask Ms.
question.
Andrews a question.
Go ahead.
As far as insurance goes, did you get any sense, are they happy with their plans? Any issues there?
I did not hear anything about insurance when I did an initial survey to reach out to teachers several weeks ago in regards to IBN. We always ask them if they're concerned about insurance, if there's any changes. A reoccurring comment that comes up every single year is that it would be wonderful if we could afford to have our dependents on our insurance policies, especially for single parents who don't have another spouse who they can use that insurance policy. That is something that consistently comes up. Insurance is very personal. People obviously are going to take some time and kind of find their nook with it. But I will add, just kind of hearing about the Employee Assistance Program, our insurance that we have right now, and this is a huge benefit that teachers this year especially have taken advantage of. Employee assistance is great, but it's hard sometimes to find a therapist. We've been able to, with our insurance, access counselors and therapists within the network, and it's a $20 copay, it's a $30 copay, and that has been so helpful. So, looking at trying to preserve those mental and emotional benefits that come with the insurance policy, I know that is something that a lot of teachers this year have commented on.
Yeah, and maybe that could be an item that we look at as a budget item as a zero copay for at least the next 2 for certain mental health services, or some type of reduced cost sharing or enhancement for the HSA. You are correct. There is a national and statewide shortage of mental health professionals. There was before the pandemic, and it's incredibly bad now.
Yes, I've heard too about the issue with dependents. I know it's very expensive to cover, even if we could do it partially, maybe hopefully someday we can afford to cover all of them. But like you said, some spouses don't have insurance or they're not working. So I know that would be a huge relief for some, but yeah, so that is always in the back of my mind. So
And just so the members of the board know, Representative Shaw has a bill down at the legislature that I've been helping, and Dr. Baca helped provide some information to provide a program to fund dependent care for schools. So he's working on it. It will probably be a pilot program because I think it's got a $160 million cost on it if you applied it broadly. But we're working with him, and that may be something that could emerge as an idea. So.
And as Dr. Osborne and I discussed, Madison will be happy to be the pilot district for that.
Yes, that would be huge.
If we're helping, I always like to, we were the first to get the testing. I always like to be first to market. All right, why don't we move on unless there's any other thoughts?
I just
Mr. Holcomb.
one quick, one point, and Dr. Baca, you mentioned about getting the communication out. And I think part of that communication, and I know you can do a very good job of this, is to make sure that people know this is serious, but that we are also really going to do whatever's necessary to deal with it. That I think you have to be able to show this is the negative side, but this is the positive that we have. Because I do think we do have, from the presentations we have some very positive things that we can do and a very positive approach to this. So we got to make sure it doesn't scare people away. At the same time, it shows them that we will find that light.
Concern but not crisis would be the tone I would suggest. All right, now on to item 7.2, the math adoption.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Governing Board and Executive Team. Do you want me to turn it over to Dr. Winters, or would you like Ms. Marshall? Okay, Ms. Marshall will introduce this agenda item regarding our math adoption review process.
Thank you, President Osborne, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Baca, and Executive Team. It seems like just yesterday we were here sharing the math adoption recommendation, but it's actually been 7 years, and we are at the end of our contract with the math adoption. And a lot has changed in the field of mathematics and the research and the resources that are available. So Dr. Winters has led a committee and wants to share the information and the results of the pilot along with our recommendation for that adoption. So I'll turn it over to our Executive Director for Curriculum and Instruction.
That's really as high as it goes. I'm new to glasses, so please excuse as I'm still trying to get used to them. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board, Dr. Baca, members of the executive team. As Ms. Marshall said, it does seem like yesterday that 7 years ago I was presenting a math adoption, but here we are again. One thing I want to stress is that conducting this process under the current circumstances was less than ideal, but because of the situation, we had to do it. And as I had every opportunity that I met with the group of teachers that participated in this, thank them up and down for their participation in this, as I know it was an extra burden on top of what we were already dealing with, and I'm very grateful for their participation in this process because of that. So our last math adoption, we went the program called My Math for K-5 and Glencoe 6-8, product by McGraw-Hill in 2015. Since then, our state standards, you might remember, went through a bit of a modification so that they are now the quote-unquote Arizona mathematics standards. Any materials we get are going to be aligned to those state standards. And in my opinion and the committee's opinion, the program we got 7 years ago was really publishers' first go at aligning programs to what I'll just refer to as, from here on out, the new standards. And in that time, we felt that the publishers have made a great deal of improvement in their materials. We really felt for the first time in going through one of these processes where every program we had submitted to us and presentations we received were good, and we would have been comfortable with anything. So it was really figuring out which one we thought was going to be best for us. So we do believe that there's been a great deal of improvement over the last 7 years in what we're getting from then. Oops, went backwards. Some other things to consider. When combined with effective instruction, a newly adopted program will enhance our students' ability to interact with rigorous math content. And I want to stress the combination of effective instruction and a new program, just a new program in itself. Just putting something in front of something is not going to be very powerful, but combining that with effective instruction will have that that effect we're desiring. The program is aligned to the rigor of the math standards. And as I said previously, the updated program shows improvements from publishers' first standards aligned programs. So let me review the process we went through. In February of 2021, so about a year ago is when I actually formally initiated this process. A request for proposal was sent to vendors. Val Gear takes care of that for me, and she has a multitude of ways to make sure any and every publisher who would want to participate receives that information. In March of 2021, we made the initial review to select quarterfinalists. We selected 3 programs for K-5 and 5 programs for 6-8. 2 were just a 6-8, but we chose to listen to their presentations as well. In May of 2021, I believe this was actually the day after school got out, we got together, and we listened to presentations by quarterfinalists to the committee. We narrowed 5 down to 3. In July of 2021, the first finalist, McGraw-Hill, or semifinalist I should say, provided PD for October to December pilot. 21 pilot teachers in grades 1, 3, 6, and 8 received McGraw-Hill materials. And I have it down below, but I also want to mention here that they did not include MTA teachers as a part of their signature program. They use Saxon, so that's why it's a little bit less than if we would have had roughly 6 additional teachers participating, but in this case it was 21. In September, the committee meeting to evaluate McGraw-Hill program and to evaluate teacher, student, and parent feedback. So we, and I'm realizing I put the wrong months, so let me back up a second. It was the August to October, and then the one where it says October 2021, when it says January to March, that should be October to December. So I'll reiterate that in a second. I just caught my mistake. So we met in September to evaluate feedback from our teachers that participated, their students, and their parents. So teachers had surveys to fill out, their students had surveys, and their parents had surveys. And as a part of a pilot program, the parents are able to look and see the materials every single day. Homework's coming home from that particular piloted program. So we have an ability for not only students and teachers, but parents to also participate. In October, Houghton Mifflin was our other semifinalist. They provided PD for that should say, as I said, October to December pilot. 21 pilot teachers in grades 1, 3, 6, and 8 received their, that should say, Houghton Mifflin materials. Pilot teachers, as I said it before, did not include the MTA due to the use of Saxon Math to align with the signature program. In December, we met to evaluate the Houghton Mifflin program. Once again, we evaluated the teacher, student, and parent feedback. And at that time, we selected the vendor we're going to present to you tonight for the recommendation to the board. And as you might have noticed, through basically the whole first semester along the side of the boardroom here, we had the public display. On August 31st, we sent a letter to families informing everybody in the district, not just the families of the students of the 21 teachers who were piloting, but everybody in the district had an opportunity to come in and take a look and review those materials. Another thing I want to mention is in grades 6 and 8, of course, they had more than one class. They might have 4 or 5 6th and 8th grade math classes. All those students participated in the pilot, not just one of their classes. The McGraw-Hill program, their K-5 was called Reveal Math. That program actually went K-8, but our middle school teachers wanted to pilot another one of their 6-8 programs called Illustrative Math. And the Houghton Mifflin program piloted is called Into Math. So community recommendation. The 21 pilot teachers met on Wednesday, December 15th to review data. Our data included teacher, student, and parent surveys. We also had qualitative discussions. 19 of the 21 teachers preferred the recommended program, and the students and parents surveys also referred the program we're going to recommend in just a moment. And with that, the committee recommendation is a program called Into Math by Houghton Mifflin. And some features are that we have, once again, consumable write-in textbooks for the life of the adoption, hands-on activities and materials, ongoing professional development. It's once again a hybrid of both print and digital resources, which, as we learned the last couple of years, came in really handy that we weren't anticipating. It is the same program, K through 8. What we've had previously was a K-5 and a 6-8, so we're hoping there's some more continuity that way as we have a K-8 program. Previously, we had an online tool called Alex. This program has a tool called Waggle that provides online individualized student practice. The teachers will get the complete print and digital teacher library, and all students will also have access to all materials in print and digital. And I also have a couple representatives from Houghton Mifflin with us this evening. Lisa and Melly have been nice enough to hang on with us so far. So if you have any questions that I'm unable to answer specifically about the program, they could jump in and assist me as well.
And Dr. Osborne, members of the Governing Board and Executive Team, I want to emphasize that the reason why we're bringing it as an information item is we want to give yet one last opportunity for feedback from any of our community, including our staff, understanding what we will be recommending at our next Governing Board meeting in 2 weeks.
Ms. Kazi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just out of curiosity, what's the ceiling for this program? Because obviously the new math standards provided a significant amount of rigor, which has now been translated to high school.
Can you define what you mean by
So
ceiling
like,
for
are we
me?
getting units on algebra, geometry, algebra 2 trig? Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, so the program's a K-8 program, so it's a line, but there's an algebra. So what we did before is, and we'll, after hopeful approval, I'll get together with those folks and we'll kind of hammer out some of those details. So we won't need a full-on algebra adoption for 8th grade, but we might need, let's say, 4 classes. So we'll order accordingly to that. So whatever needs we need, we'll be able to acquire.
Okay, fantastic. And then just out of curiosity, so again, so what we've seen then in high school is like there's basically a compression of the math progression in high school that I've seen at most of the high schools around us. So does that get, I assume that's getting reflected then because of the standards in the new materials that we're receiving.
Did you say compression? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so for example, at both, I think, Phoenix Union and at Glendale Union, there's no longer pre-calculus. You go straight from algebra 2 trig into calculus. And so now you basically, if you take algebra in 8th grade, you're going to be in calculus, 2 or BC by your senior year, or statistics, whatever it is you choose. But there is a compression happening. And so what's happening is students are coming to, algebra students specifically are coming to high school, and they, the demands on their ability are pretty significant. So I hope that makes sense.
I think so. Ms. Kazi, members of the board, Dr. Baca, executive team. So it's hard for us, so there are some challenges with that. We have K through 8 standards and that's what we're assessed on, so we have to address those. We do have students that take pre-algebra, algebra, some that expand even that. So I don't think we cannot just by those sets of standards that we're able to do that completely. However, we do have curriculum guides that we've created to address, here's the algebra track you're going to follow. So we do have that, but it's not universal for every student.
Okay.
Does that
I think so.
make sense?
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I want to echo Ms. Kazi's concerns about, because I think that one of the things that we've seen is as long as we have the ability to teach our students that are in that individualized program or that are ready for that algebra, it sets them up so well for high school. And then, frankly, they're able to access scholarships for college if they choose, if they are college bound, they're able to access scholarships for college because they're able to prove that they have that math proficiency. And I love that the students have access to materials and digital. That's a wonderful thing for all of our students who are carrying huge backpacks, although that has really gone down quite a bit over the last number of years. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the exhaustive process that our district does go through. This is not something, curriculum adoptions are not nimble or quick. They're deliberative, they're strategic, they are data-based. So thank you.
Ms. Spear, Members of the Board, I'm sorry, I wanted to piggyback on one of your comments that I neglected to mention. I do want to mention that this pilot process that we follow is not completely unique to our district, but from what I've seen from my colleagues and actually been in governing boardrooms of other school districts, a lot of times their process is that public display. And we go above and beyond that and actually enable our teachers, our students, and our parents to experience the materials that we're looking to adopt and give us feedback on those so we can make the best informed decision that we have. It's great to provide that public opportunity, but unless you're actually in it using that material, you're not going to get a real good sense. So that is I won't say it's a completely unique to Madison, but it's a rarer process that we use.
Ms. Marshall, you seem anxious
Thank you,
to comment.
Dr. Osborne. I just wanted to add to Member Causey and Member Spears' comments that Dr. Winters and I are working with Casey George, our Director for Signature Programs, and certainly interrupted with the pandemic, but it's our hope to get an algebra program, K-8, so that we increase the number of our junior high students going into high school that have already had algebra, possibly even Algebra 2. As Dr. Winter said, we also have students who are taking geometry and calculus, although it's a small number. But we have started that with our STEAM schools because it seemed like a natural fit. And Principal Maggie Rodriguez and Hillary O'Brien at Camelview, they have been so open to that, as have their teachers, and really working with Mr. George, Dr. Winters, so that we can, along with our math coach, so that we can develop a process and a mapping for those students to be on track to be able to pass algebra by 8th grade.
Dr. Osborne, may I add one more
I'll go
thing?
Ms. Spear and then Scott.
Very quick. Thank you, President Osborne. I also wanted to mention, I happen to live next door to a math tutor who had heard about the new math adoption because one of her students' families brought the letter that they received, the email that they had received with information about it. So I wanted to let our community know that that kind of communication is very, we make an effort to be transparent, and I was really happy that the math tutor next door was asking me questions about our math adoption, so just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Mr. Holcomb.
Yeah, just two things. Marshall, I'm glad you made that point because we actually have students in Madison going through that are taking calculus net, and I want to make it sure it's clear to the public that, this adoption doesn't limit that upper end, that those students who are capable of doing it, we have the resources and do that, go well beyond that, what this program is. Second thing, I'm just curious, when the setup here, do we have any idea of how many community members or others beyond the pilot program teachers came and looked at the materials?
Look, no. Left feedback, 0.
Okay.
No one digs math. Just kidding.
Mr. Holcomb, members of the board, Dr. Barker, executive team, I will say that in this is the 4th one I've done in the last 8 years now. That's not atypical. The only time we've had an ample amount of public feedback with that display was for science, which I won't get into all the reasons why. So when I say that look 0, that's been pretty typical for our previous math and our ELA adoption, but science was the one where we got plenty of feedback on. So it's not atypical in that regard.
Yes, just real quick, my comment was also about our process, so thank you for going through that process and the transparency. I'm big on transparency, and that, yes, our materials were out for many months. I saw them here every time. And of course, we do that with all our curriculum adoptions, correct, Dr. Winters? And I'm just curious, what was any feedback from the students? Any, like a little snippets of?
So so with the surveys, the teachers send me the information. They would, in those qualitative discussions, they would talk about, well, kids said this, and they will literally, and one of the questions is, which one do you like more? Which one helps you with math more? And it's all a Likert scale. And so I go through and I total up all the numbers. I don't have any hard anecdotal evidence. I could share numbers, but unfortunately, I don't have any. Their feedback is anecdotal to the teacher, plus then I get kind of a Likert scale data crunching approach to the feedback.
Sounds good. I'm sure that we're super excited about it. So. And I want to thank the representatives for being here too from the.
So, a question and a couple comments. One, Dr. Baca, I'd appreciate it if maybe you could send a note from the board to those teachers who participated in the pilot, and that we appreciate during all the challenges that they took the time. That's, you know, and parents, anyone who participates, staff. Second, I will be taking a conflict on this issue. I represent Hope Mifflin down at the Capitol, so just so folks know. But third, just briefly, how do we now onboard the program? I mean, we just went through a big discussion about how stressed out, and now we're going to dump a math adoption on them. How are we going to blend that in? And if you could talk just briefly about that,
Sure.
that would be helpful.
Dr. Osborne, members of the board, Dr. Baca, executive team. Great question that that's what keeps me up at night. When I finished up that last meeting in December, I asked the teachers, what can we do to help this go better than it has? Not that it's gone poorly, but just what can we do to go better? And the one thing they said was, train us, train us, train us, which kind of goes back to the discussion earlier about time. There's a lot of variables with that right now. So I am constantly working on a plan, and it's kind of like, well, if it's plan A, we're going to do some PD here, we'll do a half day here, we'll do this. We're going to try to get some on-demand things that they could start accessing now once the program is presumably approved, because we can't do that yet, but those kinds of things. But I wish I had a crystal ball and know what it's going to look like in 8 months, because I have to kind of design a quote-unquote normal state of affairs. I had to design a current state of, like, I had to design different iterations of what that process is going to look like. So typically, we would have something at the end of the school year. We'd have something right before school starts, and then something after school starts. So once people start using it, we kind of get a refresher. Nikki Paul, our math coach, will be trained herself very soon, I believe at the end of next month, so that she can then go start providing one-on-one attention to, or small group instruction to, so she kind of becomes the district expert and can then start providing training herself. And then once the school year starts, she'll be able to provide support to teachers. And then when teachers say, hey, we're really struggling with this, I make a phone call and we try to get some support as quickly as possible. But it's just trying to figure out what scenario is going to be suitable for our current situation to provide that training.
And as you're looking at the plan, if there are some budget implications for us, I think feel free to pass those along. And, you know, we're talking about increased teacher time and paying for this. I'd rather we invest to make sure it rolls out properly than, you know, at least let's have that in the consideration of the long list.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, why don't we move on? Now we're into the action items. Item 8.1, construction matter risk, cafeteria, concessions, and gym. Dr. Baca, you want to introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the governing board and executive team. This is an item that talks about our renovation projects and awarding the RFQ in order to move forward with the type of projects that we had planned. Ms. Garvey is available if you should have any questions. 8.1 and 8.2 have been separated out, as Mr. Holcomb will explain when we get to item 8.2.
Okay. Any questions on item 8.1? All right, I will accept the motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we award RFQ number 212205 to McCarthy Construction and Willamette Construction for gym renovation and cafeteria remodel concession building.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. All right, do I have a motion on item 8.2? Please don't jump all at once.
So moved. Do I have to say that whole thing? Like,
You could just say approve item 8.2.
I move to approve item 8.2.
Yeah, Mr. President? Yes, and I have to declare conflict. Core Construction is a client of my firm and a client of mine.
I will second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. Please note for the record, Mr. Holcomb will be abstaining from this vote. All right. And the motion passes. All right. Item 8.3, and Dr. Barker, you also explained item 8.4 while you do them together, and then we'll vote on them separately, but please introduce these items for us.
Thank you. Dr. Osborne, members of the Governing Board and Executive Team, item 8.3 is for approval of the certified teacher salary schedule for the 2022-23 school year. It's as it is currently. The reason why we do this is in order to issue contracts, we have to have an approved salary schedule. And of course, we'll make any adjustments necessary to increase that possibly for next year. And then the contract item that follows is tied into that so we can issue contracts. The plan is to get those contracts out by next week in order to have them returned by March. What I would also like to do is just foreshadow the potential of an action item for next governing board meeting that can authorize the use of stipends to incentivize our employees to return their contracts in a timely manner in appreciation for their loyalty to Madison. The item 8.4, since you're wanting me to clarify that and introduce it along with this, the contract template, legal counsel has reviewed that. It was just minor modifications to more clarify what should happen if for whatever reason the aggregate expenditure limit, it doesn't say that, but if there's any adjustment that's needed as a result of that not passing in a timely manner. And Dr. Lomley is available for any questions on either of these items if you need her to answer and address that.
Any questions or comments? If not, I'll accept a motion on item 8.3.
I move that we approve the 2022-23 certified teacher salary schedule as presented in order to issue teacher contracts.
We have a second.
Second.
Ms. Gresham, second. Please vote. All right, the item passes. Item 8.4.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve certificated, teacher contract template as presented.
I will second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. Forget how slow the system feels when you're actually chairing the meeting. It seems like an eternity. All right, the motion passes. Now on to item 9.1, discussion of future meetings. Dr. Baca, do you want to introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Governing Board and Executive Team. On February 22nd, which is our next Governing Board meeting, I want some indication from you. We have an IBN budget executive session to get direction from you as to how to proceed with our negotiations with employees. It's set for 5 p.m., but we also have a showcase at 5:45, so I don't know if you're wanting to make any adjustments to an earlier start time. We could always convene the executive session, and if we need more time, we can run the regular meeting. It looks like it's going to be short because the only two action items would be the approval of math adoption and then the idea of the retention stipends for those who return their contracts and work agreements down the road. So just to give me an indication of proceed with a 5 o'clock start time. I know there's some conflict that you may have regarding commitments, and then we can always go back into executive session after the regular meeting is completed.
And we're still doing a digital showcase for MTA?
That's correct. All of these at this point in time would continue to be the way in which we have done the showcases.
I mean, I don't know how the other board members feel. I'm okay with just moving that back to 6 because it's digital. I mean, we do it before because we have families, but if it's just us watching it, Mr. Holcomb.
Yeah, would it be possible, and if we just, if nothing else, agendize it differently, to do the showcase at 6? So give us, I want the full hour.
Okay.
However we do it, and maybe we may need more time afterwards, but let's just notice it, make the showcase at 6 o'clock, and we start at 6:15, or we can agendize it. The meeting starts, you open the meeting, first thing is the showcase.
So what we can do is go ahead and have a 6 o'clock start time and then have that actually as an agendized item as the showcase presented by MTA.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I do think we have, seems like a lot more moving pieces than we're used to in budget and IBN, so I think that's probably wise.
And then looking forward into March 8th, I want us to leave open the possibility of needing to, again, meet an executive session if there's anything that needs to be discussed regarding our budget or IBN process.
Okay. Mr. Holcomb?
Mr. President, yeah, I like that idea. It's better to have it scheduled and then cancel it if we don't need it than we don't. And there are a lot of moving pieces.
So what I would ask governing board members is to go in your calendars and for March 8th indicate a 5 p.m. possibility of executive session so that there's not a conflict. And again, we can always cancel it and make that decision in 2 weeks when we meet on the 22nd.
Sounds good. Yeah, and as most of you know, I tend to be a little busy without controlling my calendars type of year, so, I appreciate any indulgences if I'm running late because I'm stuck down at 100 West Washington. All right, any other comments or questions on the agenda? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn? I think.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I'm assuming the motion passes. We are adjourned. All right.